established. And what I'm going to be doing is presenting the findings for the winter. That will take probably about 10 minutes, and then we'll run into the panel session and we'll talk about some of the issues emerging, which are of importance to professional services firm. A little bit of a quote here, which hopefully you can read. A lot of the points raised in the tracker are similar to those we hear from other firms around skills, use of tech. It's useful to see the tracker as validating these issues, and that comes from the government. So I think we can say with some confidence that it is a tracker that is not just government's aware of it, but actually uses it and sees it as the definitive tracker. So that's great. First thing I'm going to show you is a quick slide, and this one looks at the projected level of activity over the next year. And as you can see, there haven't been very many changes over the past few quarters. Each one of those blobs is a quarter, and the numbers running around currently 76%. Now that means that 76% of the firms are projecting expansion, and I think it's about 84% projecting expansion, about 6 contraction, net 76, which is a very, very high number indeed. Another one, which is quite interesting, is that if you actually compare where the firms see themselves, which is the red line, in terms of their being on track for success, and where they see their key clients, which is the blue line, there's a fairly standard gap of around about 20 percentage points between those two lines. But it's interesting, in the last quarter, both of them have reduced by about the same percentage points. 74 plays 53. So what you've got is very much a reduction in level of what's called, I would call, the on-track success for both firms and clients. And I think in a way what they're saying is, yes, we're going to grow, but maybe not quite as fast as we were before. That's kind of what I read into that. If you look at the new workflow, again, 82% projecting expansion, 4% contraction. Headcount, a little bit less, and we may be picking up with Julia some of the HR issues here, but 64% expecting an increase over the next year in the headcount, 4% contraction, and the difference, 30-odd%, is clearly those who are looking to stay in the same place. But it's still a very strong message around we as a group are looking to contract. And as I mentioned, it is a research panel. We get 98% completion, and therefore the comparability is extremely high. This one's a little bit busier. What it's really saying is that finance and people, Edward has a very strong finance background, as you probably gather. Finance and people carry most weight during partner discussions. So it will be interesting to hear whether our panels see that in terms of the boardrooms that they sit in. The use of technology is quite an interesting one. That's the little purple line. And what's happened with the use of technology is that if we go back to the last tracker, it was up and around about 50%, having been around about 30% for quite a long time with the odd blip. But then what happened was, for the one that we just did, it dropped back again to the 30s in terms of it being, which is the one in the top 3. What did that say to me? It said that everybody kind of thought, oh, great, Gen AI is going to come along. It's going to change everything. They've lifted the bonnet. They've had a look at it. They think it probably will do something, but maybe it's not today. And we're going to talk a bit more about that. Was it a blip, or is it actually going to be resuming its top 3 status in terms of priorities for the firm? Moving on to the constraints, this again, there isn't really very much to say here other than that there are 3 constraints which are the ones that constantly are raised. The poor economic outlook, that's the light blue one. Fee pressures, which is the purple, and then margin erosion, which is the olive. And interestingly, I mean, to me, the one that's quite interesting is the poor economic climate. If you go back to 2020, which is over to the left, that was very, very important thing. Everybody thought that, I won't say the world's going to collapse, but in the middle of COVID, people were, I think one finance director said to me, yeah, our planning horizon is 3 weeks. Normally it'd be probably more like 3 years. Then it kind of just fell away completely. And in 21, everybody had lots of money because of furloughing and government help and various loans, etc. And now with the economy kind of looking a bit shakier, flatlining, I think some people call it, not much growth, technical recession we had up to fairly recently, it's now come up to the top again. So the economic outlook is definitely one that people are seeing is preventing them from achieving the growth they would like. What's management's role? What's management going to be doing all about it? Well, again, the things that here, getting the best from your team, it pretty much always comes in. That's the light blue one. Communicating effectively, that's the purple. Making change happen is the green. Those three kind of all just stay together. The communication was particularly important, I think, during the pandemic. It kind of spiked, but now they've all come back, and those are the three things. And again, they're all people-based activities, really. And I guess with people-based businesses, that's not unusual, but I'm sure we'll pick that one up as well. What else can we see? Let's move on. So no real surprises here. I've just it's very busy, but it just kind of shows you that things are settling down. Around half the time at home is the middle bit. Over to the left, it's around a quarter of the time at home, none of the time at home, and all of the time have pretty much gone away. But there's definitely, it's sort of between a quarter and half the time is what people are actually spending the time doing. Office space requirements, again, the big olive bit says about the same, and that remains pretty much the case. Nobody's really, a few people are looking to expand. That's the people at the top, the purple one. A few people are looking to continue to take less space, but it's beginning to settle. I mean, what's quite interesting, if you take the blue one at the bottom, go back 2 or 3 years, and it was getting on for 50% of people say we're going to be taking less space. And I think there was a real bloodbath in the office world when that was announced, or people realized that. But it's kind of changed. Now people, I think it's more settled. This one I think is quite interesting, and I think we are going to pick this one up in the panel shortly. This just tracks the remote working in the sense of people reporting that they are having increased productivity as a result of remote working from home. Now, if you go back to 2021, it was up to about 50%. It's been on a sort of gentle decline. It's currently, I think there was one blip, 12, but that was kind of unusual. All survey, every now and again you get a blip, that's life. But the trend is pretty clear that less and less firms now take the view that productivity has been increased as a result of remote working, which was one of the things that was certainly spoken about a lot early on in the pandemic. So what I'm going to do now is quickly just run through a quick summary of the points I've just made, and then we'll move into the panel session and invite all three panel members to comment on one of them. So the first one we went through, if you recall, we just said there were really no material changes in the confidence levels, but there is a reduction in the level of perceived on-track success for both firms and clients. So yes, we're going to keep growing, but perhaps not quite as fast as we did. That the projected new workflow remains strong, but the projected headcount growth is less buoyant, although it's still 64% place 4. It's pretty impressive, I think. Finance and people issues are carrying most weight at partner discussions. That there's increasing use of technology, but that's also reduced in priority in terms of the firms. So yes, everybody was suddenly, it's in the top 3, but is it now? It's falling away again. So is that a blip or is that a trend? Who knows? That the key constraints on growth are the poor economic outlook, fee pressures, and margin erosion. That people-based activities are seen as contributing most to achieving the firm's goals. Most people are working between a half and a quarter of the time from home. Only a few firms are looking to alter their space requirements. And then finally, far fewer firms are reporting increased productivity from working from home than in late 21. So I'm going to switch now to Edward and invite Edward to give some thoughts. And then we will move from there to inviting Julia and John to come and share their thoughts too. Over to you, sir.
Thanks very much, Richard. I think the takeaway from the tracker for me is the timing of the survey and the sort of slight erosion of confidence is really, I think, down to the timing of the economic news, the 2 periods of negative growth. I think certainly from my perspective and what we're seeing is still cautious optimism, and certainly listening to John's comments regarding the election, it's interesting to note Labour's commitment, certainly the communication commitment to to business with the British Infrastructure Council, the Council for Economic Growth, the fiscal lock they're talking about, and other things such as the technical excellence colleges. If you look at the sort of the boardroom discussions, I think, as the survey showed, finance and cash flow and people, as I'm sure Julia will refer to in a minute, are still hot topics, but I think they go very much hand in hand, very much with regard to the success of the business, the success of our clients, is really down to still making the best of what we've got. So the finance discussions still focus on our internal efficiency, our operational efficiency, and indeed getting the best people in the best place at the right time. I think those two going together for us are key priorities going forwards. And I think certainly, as the tracker shows, that goes hand in hand with the confidence sector, the confidence analysis that we see. I think a couple of other things I'd mention is the technology point. I think we see a lot of AI discussions that, in fact, probably turn out to be of limited use. I think there is still that initial enthusiasm for AI has waned slightly. And I think as people get into analysing, whether they're setting up innovation groups, whether they're setting up studies to analyse what we can do, there is a sense that a lot of stuff out there is great stuff, and there is some good stuff, but practical implications, practical use requires a lot more consideration. And indeed, as we all know, the dangers of AI are certainly regularly referred to in press articles. So I think for us, as the tracker shows, it's very cautious optimism for this year. What will happen in the general election? Is Labour's commitment to business as strong as they communicate? Will that go into the first Parliament, and indeed the second if they are elected? And as we go through, what are we going to do to make sure that as a firm we are making the best of what we've got? They're my thoughts. Perhaps if I may hand over to Julia.
Thanks very much, Edward. Thank you. Yeah, so probably unsurprisingly, I've picked up on some of the more people themes, which actually does follow on very nicely from what Edward just said. So, it doesn't surprise me that, getting the best out of our people is still, they're the conversations I'm obviously still in, because I think that actually things are settling down in terms of, talent retention. We all realise, I think, over the last couple of years, how destabilising, how time consuming, how limiting it can be when you're having to deal with staff turnover, even though we didn't suffer too much where I am now, which was good, but actually is quite disruptive. So actually, thankfully, the talent market is stabilizing a little bit. It's still important. It's still something that we work at to be able to attract the best talent. But I think we've all learned over the last few years that retention is as important as anything else. So making sure that we've got the absolute right conditions for everybody to really thrive and feel supported in their roles, has to be our number one top priority. And I think we've all had that proven to us over the last few years. The other thing that's really jumped out at me was the productivity doesn't feel as high when people are working from home. And Richard and I were talking about this yesterday. My big thought of that is, we've been doing it for a long time now, haven't we? What is memory? What are people actually comparing against? Are we comparing to last year, the year before, pre-pandemic? Because again, that's not my experience or our experience. Our experience is actually people are really productive because they are being able to, in a high trust environment, able to balance their client commitments and their working arrangements. And, some of the daily life pressure has reduced, which is especially amongst, some of our younger generations, I have to say. So I'm surprised. I'm going to be looking at that with interest as it develops, Richard, over the next time you run the survey and seeing what happens there. I'm hearing a lot of talk in, my networks around, people mandating coming back into the office a bit more. That's certainly not a road that we're going down at Lewis Silkin, because we're finding it's working for us, having a really flexible approach to it. I do think about professional service, though, in the context of, so the KPMG survey on CEOs a bit more globally, where people are actually, the CEOs are saying actually people in the office is really important to us. And that's something that we really want to encourage. And we're not seeing that in professional services, certainly not in the circle that, I'm moving. We're accepted. I think that, that's part of what we offer. It's part of what makes us productive, that we can give something to our people to make them get the best out of their working day. I would say as well, I'm still more less about productivity, more around the well-being aspects of people spending a lot of hours at home. So that's something I'm actually more interested in.
We have settled on in my team 2 core days in the office, which should be a Monday and a Thursday, because we think it is essential to be together at the same time. But what I have noticed, and there is no mandate to be in any more than that, there is a growing client pressure to be face to face at times that work for them. So there is a demand for us to be present that's increasing, I would say. So that means that where people may have been in 2 days a week, they may very well be in 3 or sometimes 4 days a week. So that's not necessarily a productivity question. It's us being responsive to our clients. And I also come into the build. So I'm at our offices today. 6 months ago, Fridays would be absolutely tumbleweed in the office. Now the meeting rooms are reasonably full because people are using, for example, Fridays to meet in groups because that's a relatively clear day in the diary. So I'm beginning to see working patterns change as well. I think Julia's point is really well made, because I just don't really remember what our productivity was like before we were hybrid. But we're not going to go back to a full 4 or 5 days because we don't have enough desks to do it. So even if we wanted to, we couldn't do it.